Hello, my name is Hwansan Sunim, and this is Sun Meditation in English. Now, this is a meditation hour, so for the rest of this program, I will ask everyone here in our studio audience and all of you viewers at home to please continue this meditation, this posture, this breathing, and this questioning of imoko in your minds throughout the rest of the program. So, today's topic for contemplation and meditation is how to set up a meditation practice at home. Interestingly enough, in the last few days, I actually received a message over the internet from a man named Mohammed who lives, I think, in the Middle East. He said he was from Arab, so I think he may mean Saudi Arabia. But he wrote to me, somehow he had seen this program on YouTube, I believe, and he wrote to me and asked me how he could set up a meditation program at his home because there are no meditation centers around where he lives. So for Mohammed and for the other viewers out there who have been asking similar questions, today's program will be dedicated to the practical steps we need to take to create a robust and consistent meditation program within our own homes and lives. Now, the most important thing is that when we start meditation, the temptation is to think of it as one more thing that we have to do, one more activity. If we're going to spend that much time and energy, I think that we ought to do it really well. That, just on a basic cost-benefit kind of analysis, you really want to get the most out of the time and energy that you expend on this. So I would ask that don't think of it in terms, the first step that we need to do is don't think of it in terms of adding one more thing to your life. And instead, what I would recommend is think of it as a way, we must think of it in terms of adjusting the way we live so that the way we live continues to enhance and enrich our meditation. If you've decided to get into shape and you're going to go through the trouble to work out every day, then it only makes sense that you adjust your diet and your sleep pattern and your daily schedule. If you're exercising as hard as you can, say an hour or two a day, but then you don't watch what you eat and you don't regulate your sleep hour, what good is that going to be? The way you live will oppose the exercise that you're doing. Similarly, if we're going to go through the trouble of meditating, we want it so that the way we live supports the meditation and vice versa. You don't want to be in a situation where the way you live counteracts your meditation, because otherwise you'll be just stuck in the same place. So ideally, if we can succeed in this, if we can find a way of living that mutually supports meditation, then over time what we will gain is a sense of progress in our lives, a sense of moving forward toward enlightenment ultimately. Remember that meditation is not something that you do for a few months or a few years. It's considered a lifelong practice to be performed over decades. So then the question becomes, how are we to live? How are we to behave if we want to do meditation right? And fortunately for us, this is actually one of the first things that the Buddha ever taught. It's called formally in English, the three learnings. And it forms the core of Buddhist teaching and practice for all forms of Buddhism around the world. So now what the Buddha taught in the three learnings, there's going to be three sort of things that we have to do, is that the first learning, the first thing we need to do if we're going to meditate is not create a daily schedule and buy a meditation mat and make time. The Buddha, interestingly enough, said that the first step we need to take, the foundation for our meditation practice, will be ethical guidelines, ethical precepts. We have to live in an ethical way. And the formal term in Sanskrit is shila, S-I-L-A, a set of ethical precepts that will guide our behavior and our life activity. In so much as meditation, unlike a physical exercise, is designed to transform our consciousness, enlighten us, and perfect our character, we have to accept a certain amount of ethical responsibility. We have to become the kind of people who don't who don't cause harm for others or for ourselves. So the first foundation is ethical within our meditation practice, and that's the commitment that we need to make, that we be good and we behave well. The Buddha initially, his first formulation of this edict to be ethical was very, very simple. He didn't set down a lot of rules, and it's called the Buddha's 7 general precepts. And it's very simple, and I'll recite it. I'll recite the original formula to you now. Do not commit evil. Try to enact all forms of good. On your own, keep the mind clean. This is all of the Buddha's teaching. So clearly, the Buddha expected his disciples to be able to differentiate between good and evil, positive and negative, that which causes suffering and that which does not. And he simply told them that to go on the side of good. But over time, as the monastics and the lay people faced the challenges of creating large-scale communities and running them, they needed more specific and concrete rules and guidelines. And so these ethical guidelines that began from such a simple formula proliferated. Now, the most common ethical precepts that are held by Buddhists around the world are the so-called 5 precepts, and all practicing Buddhists in the world hold these 5 precepts. And I will present them to you as a reference point to build your own ethical guidelines, although I would encourage that you simply follow the Buddha's teaching. So the first of the 5 precepts is do not kill. The second is do not steal the belongings of others. The third is do not engage in sexual misconduct. And the fourth is do not lie. And the fifth is do not consume mind-altering substances. In the old days, that would have been liquor. So these are the 5 basic precepts. For another reference point, in Korean Buddhism, lay people are expected to hold 10 precepts. Now, the precepts are always harmful behaviors, negative behaviors that we are expected to avoid. If we can avoid harmful behaviors, then the rest really is up to us, as long as we're not hurting others or ourselves. So the 10 precepts in Korean Buddhism are called the 10 good Mahayana precepts. And once again, for a reference point, I will list them for you. So the first 3 of the 10 pertain to physical action. So the first is do not kill other living beings. Now, in the modern age, this is not as simple as it used to be, because if we were to stay perfectly still and not walk around and risk injuring insects, and stop eating, because food also involves the destruction of life forms, and if we stop drinking because there are microscopic organisms in the water, nonetheless, simply because of the existence of our immune system, our body will be destroying uncountable numbers of single-celled life forms. So the precepts are not meant to be taken absolutely literally, and this was understood even in the time of the Buddha. So within Buddhism, it's taught that only the Buddha can truly uphold the precepts. The rest of us cannot do it perfectly. Nonetheless, we have to try. So the question becomes intention. Are we killing with intention, out of negative emotion, out of negative mind states? So this is something that we should understand if we're going to take these ethical precepts and try to apply them in a concrete and specific way in our own lives. And I'll touch on this more as we go on. But in any event, you don't want to murder. You don't want to destroy life forms unnecessarily out of spite, cruelty, indifference, or carelessness. So once again, the first precept, do not kill other living beings. The second, do not steal the belongings of other living beings. The third, do not engage in wicked and lewd behavior. This again refers to sexual relations. So these are the 3 that pertain to physical actions of the 10. The next 4 pertain to speech, the kinds of speech we are asked to avoid. So the first of the precepts regarding speech is do not lie. And lying includes deceiving by omission. And then the second is do not engage in licentious and profane speech, using profanity, telling off-color stories. And the reason for that is it's not that Buddhists lack a sense of humor. It's because more often than not, when that kind of speech is used in a sarcastic and demeaning manner, it creates a negative mind state in the listeners, intentionally or unintentionally. So insofar as we want to practice, not only do we want to conduct our own practice in a wholesome way, but we don't want to have an unwholesome influence on others, this precept is included. The third of the 4 speech precepts is do not engage in divisive speech, meaning do not say one thing to one person and another thing to another person and put them into conflict with one another out of spite or malice or manipulativeness or whatever. And finally, the 4th is do not engage in evil speech, meaning cursing others. In the old days, in ancient times, that would have been literally putting a curse on someone. But in these days, it's hate-filled speech intended to harm the other person psychically and to indirectly cause harm to the person. So those are the 4. Do not lie, do not engage in licentious and profane speech, do not engage in divisive speech, do not engage in evil speech. Then the final 3 of the precepts pertain to our mind states, the kind of mind states that we are asked to regulate and hold ourselves responsible for. So it's not just what we express into the world, it's even our internal world is subject to ethical regulation. So the first of the 3 mental precepts is, do not give rise to the mind of coveting, greed, desire, for things that don't belong to you, for things that you shouldn't have. Okay? The second is, do not give rise to the mind of anger. Now, anger here is not simply losing your temper. It's a mind state of rage and hatred. Truly destructive mind state. And this mind state is considered the most destructive of the 3. And within Korean Buddhism, they say that if you lose your temper and allow yourself to fall into the mind of anger, you destroy all of your good karma. So this one is given particular attention. And finally, the last precept pertaining to the mind, and the 10th precept, is do not hold to wrongful and foolish views. Now, depending on the school of Buddhism that you encounter, the idea of which view is most wrongful and foolish differs. Within Korean Buddhism, as well as other schools of Buddhism, the most wrongful and foolish view that one can possibly hold is to not believe in the law of karma, the law of causality. And what the law of causality is, it's just common sense. It just means that when you think, say, or do something, you will create consequences in the world and for yourself. Now, within the Buddhist teaching of karma, what that means is that you will encounter whatever it is that you thought, you said, or you did to another person or another living being or simply into the world. That whatever you think or do comes back to you in equal measure. Now, even if you don't believe that, even if you're not yet a practicing Buddhist, nonetheless, it's only common sense and it's actually wisdom to think that anything that we say or do will create an effect in the world, will create an influence in the world. So don't act as if you're completely alone and that what you do doesn't matter and what you do doesn't affect other people. Now, the interesting thing about the Buddhist precepts is that it includes thoughts and feelings. Even internal, unexpressed thoughts are said to have an effect both on yourself and on the outside world. And this is sort of a defining point of the Mahayana Buddhist view of ethics. Here, within Mahayana Buddhism and within Korean Buddhism, the precepts are not held or violated depending on whether you do them or not. They are judged based on our intention. So, for example, the very first one, do not kill other living beings. If in your mind you give rise to intention to harm another living being, to kill them, then you've already broken that precept. If in your mind you curse someone and say bad things about them, then already you've broken the precept. This is why only the Buddha is said to be able to hold the precepts, because only the Buddha has perfect control, perfect mastery of his own mind. So once again, these are guidelines, a line in the road that we're intended to follow. We need not take them too literally, but we ought to be quite committed and strict in trying to adhere to them, both in spirit and in letter, as much as we can. This will be the foundation of our meditation practice. So why is it the foundation of our meditation practice? What does it matter whether we're good people or not good people? The meditation will work on us anyway. If we sit like this, breathe like this, think like this, it'll clear our minds, it'll refresh us, it'll cleanse us. There has been a school of thought, especially in the West, when, say, 50, 60 years ago, when Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, was being introduced into North America and Europe. And back then, they had a slightly distorted view, or it was presented in a distorted view of Zen. And there was an idea that if you just meditate and attain one-pointed concentration, total focus and absorption into what you're doing, whatever it is you're doing, that's meditation, and that is enlightenment, and that is Zen or Sun or whatever you want to call it. That's Buddhism. So, and it could pertain to anything. The idea was that Zen or Sun Buddhism is beyond good and evil. Meditation and enlightenment are beyond good and evil, and so we shouldn't subject them to moral categories. And this kind of thinking was brought into the various kinds of liberation movements that were happening in the West during the 1950s and 60s. And because it seemed to support a social and political agenda, it continued to be interpreted that way. But these days it's well known that Buddhism actually does not teach that. It is important that we have an ethical foundation for our practice. And I want to speak about this in the most practical, concrete, and even self-centered way possible. Let's say that you totally don't care about other people. You just don't care. You have no conscience, no concern for others. And you're not interested in gaining that. You just want to do the meditation because it's good for your health. So why should we be ethical? Why should we be moral? So even on a practical, very practical, almost ruthlessly practical viewpoint like that, the thing is, if you engage in an immoral or amoral lifestyle and behavior, what's going to naturally happen, because we do live in the world with other human beings, what's going to naturally happen is either you have to hide your actions, hide the way you're really living for fear of what other people will think about you or do to you, or if you decide to be transparent about it, you'll have to defend yourself all the time. Defend yourself against the censure of others, defend yourself against their attempt to restrain you. So you are putting yourself into conflict with the world. You are out of harmony with the natural flow of things. And internally, even if you're willing to put up with that in your external life, internally you are forever in a state of anxiety, worrying what other people are thinking and planning to do about you. So on a very, very practical, from a very, very practical point of view, you do not have the necessary external stability of your life to do a consistent meditation practice, nor do you have internal centeredness to be able to meditate effectively. So if only for yourself, if only for your own benefit, it is absolutely necessary that we have a firm and solid ethical foundation for our practice. And this is why the three learnings, the core of the Buddha's original teachings, begin with ethical precepts. Yes, within Buddhism, enlightenment is considered to be beyond good and evil, and it's also considered to precede it. But when we begin in our path to that ultimate transcendent, goal, we must begin within the terms of good and evil, within the terms of ethics. So this is the first thing that we need to know, both on an idealistic and spiritual level, and on a practical and application level. So why don't we take a break here, and when we get back, we'll continue to explore the three learnings. So once again, the first of the three learnings is the ethical precepts. And it is within Buddhist teaching, it is only by accepting, maintaining, and upholding them that we can not only stand in front of the mirror with confidence and self-respect, but we can stand in front of other people at ease and confident. We need to have this wholesome and positive and confident and transparent attitude if we are to enter into intense meditation practice. If you are living without precepts, if you are living in an unwholesome way or an immoral or amoral way, then you'll be creating all sorts of unpleasant consequences, both in the world around you and in your inner world of mental experience. And this will oppose and actually act against what you're trying to achieve in your meditation. In a word, the way you live and the way you meditate will be put into conflict with one another. So for very practical reasons and very profound reasons, the first of the three learnings, the foundation of the three learnings taught by the Buddha must be ethical precepts. Now the second of the three learnings is called in Sanskrit samadhi, which in English is usually translated as one-pointed concentration. And this refers to the end goal of meditation, when our entire consciousness is united, is unified into a single whole, placed on a single target, which will differ depending on the meditative tradition. Now, within the context of Sun Korean Buddhism, samadhi is considered to be a state in which the imoko hwadu sustains itself. So you're no longer required to repeat it over and over with each breath. And that is samadhi within the terms of the meditation practice that we are trying to undertake. But most of us cannot achieve such a profound level of meditative ability right away. So it's helpful to think of the second learning as simply being meditative practice itself. And this is what we want to be trying to maintain, not only when we're sitting, this idea of one-pointed concentration, but in the course of our daily lives. And if we can do that, if we can build our meditative practice, our samadhi, on the basis of our ethical precepts, the sila, then the third learning is said to be a consequence of the first two. The third learning emerges naturally as a result of the interaction of the first two. And that in Sanskrit is called prajna, which in English is generally translated as wisdom. But as I've mentioned on this program several times before, wisdom within Buddhism is not defined as accumulated knowledge or life experience. Wisdom is more understood as insight or clear perception, to be able to see things as they are, to be able to perceive the true nature of the universe and the true nature of one's own reality and the oneness of our true nature with the true nature of the universe. So this is enlightened insight. This is, in fact, enlightenment itself. The ethical precepts are metaphorically described as a vessel, a cup. Now, the cup has to be clean and it has to be sound. There can't be any cracks in it or any kind of polluted matter inside of it if it's going to function properly as a cup. And then the second learning, samadhi, one-pointed concentration, is considered to be the water that you pour into the cup. And the water must be clean and clear. If the cup is stable and whole, then the water and then the clean water inside will eventually settle down, and there will be no more waves, and the surface of the water will be as clear and clean and bright as a mirror. And in the surface of the water, the third learning, which is metaphorically described as the moon will be reflected. The moon of wisdom will be reflected in the water of samadhi that is upheld and contained within the framework of our ethical precepts. This is the Buddha's original description of the path to enlightenment, the technique of achieving enlightenment, and the components that you need to use to get to enlightenment. And these practices, these techniques, these three learnings can still be applied within our lives. And the story goes like this. In the Buddha's previous life, he was a wandering monastic, and he was walking through the forest. And as he was walking, a deer ran right by him in a flash. And then shortly thereafter, a band of hunters appeared with bows and arrows chasing the deer. And they asked the Buddha, the monastic, where did the deer go? Did you see a deer? Where did you go? Where did it go? And the Buddha lied to them. He told them it went into a different direction than where the deer had actually gone. So the hunters went off in the wrong direction, and that was the gist of the Buddha's decision. And the moral of the story is that at times we just don't have good choices in front of us. Under those circumstances, we have to pick the lesser evil, the action that produces lesser suffering, to avoid a greater suffering, to avoid a greater evil. If he had told the hunters the truth, he would have aided the hunters in killing a living being, in committing the most serious ethical violation of killing, of murder. And he himself would have been complicit in it. So he had to undertake the lesser sin of lying, of deceiving them, to avoid the greater sin. And this is the guideline that's given to us. Sometimes you're just in a bad situation and you have to do something about it. Then choose the course of lesser suffering, choose the lesser sin. Another thing that I would like to point out about the Buddhist teachings is that it is highly realistic. If you look at the structure of the three learnings, what you can see is it begins with us being good. Yes, we have to be good, we have to do good, but it admits that it's not enough. It is not enough to become fully happy. It is not enough to reach our highest level of development as human beings. We need meditation as well. So being good is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And if we can understand that, then we can sort of come to terms with the pain that we often feel. Well, I'm a good person and still things aren't working out for me. I'm a good person and nobody recognizes that and I'm not happy. We can recognize that realistically in this world, being good is necessary, but it's not always enough. The physical sensations that I feel, the emotions and thoughts that come up in me, is there a policy or a guideline that can help me go through that? And this actually was one of the very first things that I learned under my teacher, Hwansan Sunim, many years ago. And the formal iteration of that teaching is a formula in SEON Buddhism. In Korean, it's Do, Hal, Yang, Mu, Shim, which I will loosely translate as, in the face of both pleasure and pain, hold to no mind. Now, the term no mind is used in Western Buddhism. It does not mean that you're mindless. It does not necessarily mean that you have zero mental content in your consciousness at any given moment. It simply means that you are not attached to mind states. Now that formulation is a little bit foreign now to our modern culture. So I will provide a metaphor that was given to me that will make it clear how to understand that teaching and how to apply it. I was told in the face of unpleasant inner experiences, whether they be physical sensations or mental emotions, that I ought to be like a tree in winter that has a wind blowing through it. So a tree in winter has all of its leaves have fallen off, all of the twigs and lesser branches have fallen off, and really you just have the minimal large branches and the trunk. So when a wind blows through it, there is minimal resistance. The tree hardly interrupts the wind hardly shakes the tree. And this is what we're supposed to be in the face of our inner life experience. Let it come when it comes, and let it go when it goes. And this is the teaching that we often hear of called non-attachment. Non-attachment is not a rejection of experience. It's not becoming numb inside. It's not cutting yourself off from your own physical and mental life. Non-attachment simply means non-resistance. Let it pass through you, and when it goes, do not be attached. Once again, when it comes to you, do not resist it. When it passes by you, don't try to hold on to it. So that's the way to understand how we should deal with what happens inside of our bodies and minds. Now, how do you do that? Practically speaking, how do you be a tree in winter with the wind blowing through it? And the answer, of course, is very simple. We simply meditate. We simply hold our posture, engage the abdominal breathing, and do the imoko, and automatically, because our attention physically and mentally is focused on our hwadu, everything else will just flow through us. Okay? So now we have a basic policy of dealing with how to conduct our outer lives and how to deal with our inner occurrences. Now, a lot of people feel that a policy of non-attachment will nonetheless somehow diminish our experience of life, that we will have a less intense life experience, that we tend to feel that immersion, diving into things, will give us a more intense experience of life. And the Buddhist argument is actually, no, that's not true. Calmness and non-attachment and intensity of experience and richness of experience are not mutually exclusive. They are, in fact, from the Buddhist perspective, one and the same. And this can be seen in how Buddhist monastics are taught to eat, especially within my home temple, Hwansan. Many people love to eat. They think it's something that we have to do to stay alive, and it's considered one of the great joys and pleasures of life. And people really can't imagine giving up the joy of eating. But the Buddhist argument is that people don't really know how to enjoy food. Why is that? Because the food, taste stimulus, is so powerful and is so connected to our memories, our emotions, and our thoughts that the moment we taste anything, it causes a chain reaction of mental events within our minds. We are not there most of the time for the food that we're eating. Once we taste something, unless your mind is highly trained, you will go off in a chain reaction of mental associations. It will remind you of another meal that you had and the person that you met at the time, and then that person will remind you of some other memory, and you're not with your food. You're not tasting your food most of the time. You're getting these little jolts of flavor followed by these mental journeys into your past, into your future, into your fantasies, into your worries. So the Buddhist argument is that these meals that we think we're enjoying, we don't actually know how to enjoy. Now, people think of enjoying a meal as having dinner with friends and talking. So if you add talking to the mix, you're almost ignoring the food. And this accounts for why we overeat so much, because we're getting so little of the enjoyment of the flavor. So we have to compensate by upping the dosage, the quantity that we ultimately ingest, and that, of course, causes all sorts of problems for us. So within Buddhism, Sun Buddhist monasteries, the way we're taught to eat is first we eat in silence, okay? And that immediately puts our attention on what we're doing. And we are asked to chew the food very, very slowly. And there's a set procedure. My teacher actually recommends that we chew the food 50 times. And what will happen, 50 times while you're in a state of meditation, but you're not doing the abdominal breathing because that will interrupt your digestion. If you do that, you are with the flavor of the food all the way through. And you can enjoy the deep hidden flavors of the food as you continue to chew it. For example, if you eat rice, if you take a spoonful of rice and you start to chew it, as your saliva acts upon the starch in the rice, the flavor of the rice will slowly change and become very sweet. And if you're very attentive, you can watch the progression of this food, the shift in flavor as it deepens and sweetens in your mouth. And you begin to see that eating is actually a very living, evolving experience. You can enjoy eating more with meditation. You can enjoy your life more because you're present for it, because your mind isn't skipping away into its own reveries. So you do not need to sacrifice intensity and richness of life experience to achieve inner peace. This is one of the most important teachings that we can have, and it's very, very important that we understand the teaching of non-attachment. Buddhism is not life-denying or life-negating. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It embraces and accepts life and teaches us the specific technique of how to do it. So with this now, we have the ability to shape and create a foundation for our external lives and a policy or a teaching to guide our inner lives. So the only thing that we need to do now, in terms of setting up our home practice, is learning how to meditate in the moment. There should be no division between your seated meditation and your daily activity. And I have mentioned this on this program before, so I'll only speak this briefly. We need to practice holding the hwadu and being mindful of our posture and breathing, even as we perform the daily actions of our lives. And the metaphor that my teacher Hwansan Sunim uses is it's like learning to drive a car. At the beginning, you're overwhelmed by the steering wheel and all these elements and instruments of the car that you have to use at the same time. And so you can't talk, you can't think, you can't listen to music. But later, when you get good at it, you can work the accelerator, the brake, look at the various rear view mirrors and work the turn signals and the steering wheel while having a conversation, while listening to music, and so forth. It's just a matter, like any other skill, you just need to practice at it. Likewise, we can do the daily tasks of our living and perform the hwadu if we simply practice enough. Okay. If we understand these basic principles, the three learnings, the idea of non-attachment, and the idea of integrating, harmonizing your meditation and your daily life, this maximizes, this puts our life in alignment, our behavior, our thoughts, our speech, our action, our behavior, in alignment with what we're trying to achieve in meditation. It's just like having the right diet and the right sleep schedule to support your exercise schedule. And then if you can do that, then we come to the point where we can think about a daily schedule. The daily schedule should be the end point of our planning, not the first step. And I'll give some very simple advice for building a daily schedule of meditation to conclude today's program. First of all, practically speaking, you should practice this seated meditation posture until slowly increasing the time that you spend on each session until you can sit comfortably and naturally for 1 hour. Okay. In Korean Buddhist monasteries, they tend to sit in units of 1 hour or 50 minutes. So if you want to be in a community setting, you need to be able to sit 1 hour. The next thing, that's point number one. Train till you can sit for an hour straight relatively comfortably. Point number two is, when you sit, switch both legs. So if you sit with your right leg on top for, say, 30 minutes, then the next time you sit with your left leg on top for an equal amount of time. You have to train both legs equally. Otherwise, if you go to one leg too much, you can mess up your pelvic alignment. So you want to equalize. And it'll be tempting to use one leg because most people are more flexible on one side. But if anything, go to the weaker side, go to the stiffer side. So that's the next piece of practical advice that I would like to share. The third is it's good to sort of assign a space within your home, your living area for meditation. Practically that means get a meditation mat and put it in one place, and that area will be your little meditation space. And in addition to that, if possible, use incense when you meditate. And what will happen is that the fragrance of the incense will infuse that area of your living space. And whenever you smell it, you will be reminded to meditate. In fact, it may even make you start meditating right there and then. Okay, so you want your space to include a meditation space. So at the very least, you want to get a meditation mat and some incense. And then next is, practically speaking, don't meditate on a full stomach. Because you have to move your abdomen when you're meditating. And the recommendation is that you don't start formal seated meditation until 2 hours after a full meal. And finally, don't listen to music while you meditate. A lot of people like to listen to music when they meditate because they feel it calms them and puts them into a good positive state. And that kind of thinking is based on a basic misperception of what meditation is. The goal of meditation is enlightenment, but calm and peace are a natural side effect of meditation. We don't need to seek it. It'll happen naturally if we just meditate enough. The problem with music is that, like food, it may put us in a good mood, but it sets off a chain reaction of mental and emotional events, which is the very opposite of what we want in our meditation. So if you want to be serious in your meditation, you don't want to be using music for it. So those are the sort of the practical steps that we need to take to begin a practice of meditation at home. And what I would ask all of our members of our studio audience and our viewers at home is when you get the chance, when this particular episode goes online, to review it, because I've provided a lot of information here. The important thing about today's the information that I've provided today is you don't have to be a monastic or join a monastery to have a robust meditation practice in your own life. Although I do highly recommend that you join some kind of community so you can get support, social support from other meditators and from someone who can act as a teacher or guide. But the most important thing is that we can do this within our own lives, and enlightenment, the goal of meditation, is available to all of us. This is something that we need to take seriously. So I will encourage all of you to begin your own lives of meditation if you haven't already. And I believe we're out of time, so thank you once again for listening and viewing this program. Thank you to all of our studio audience members, and thank you to all of you viewers who have tuned in today. So once again, I will conclude. May we all attain the Buddha.